Hey everybody, thanks for joining us at Optimum Leadership Television. I'm Steve Shappert, the Connecticut Art Gallery and Connecticut Real Estate. Tonight we're here with Jamie Arber. He's the executive director at the Supported Living Group. You're based in Avon, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So what is it that the Supported Living Group does?
We provide a full range of support services to individuals with disabilities. Predominantly we specialise in brain injury support, although we also provide services on the autism waiver and elder care services as well.
Fantastic. Near and dear to my heart, have a traumatic brain injury myself back when I was 14, and yeah, I'm still working on it.
Yeah.
You notice I stuttered before? Okay,
Yeah.
so you can make fun of me later. Anyway, you've been doing this for about 10 years, right?
I came into the field in 2010, yeah,
Okay.
so around just over 10 years.
So you got any like milestones and things along the way?
I was the youngest executive director in the field. I came into the field, as I said, in 2010, and I was executive director in training by the end of that year. It was a smaller mum and pop organisation, but within 3 years I had taken that company to be the largest of its type in Connecticut. So that was one of my milestones, yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
So I hear like vocational training, innovative vocational training is your thing.
Yeah, it's something that I've kind of hung my hat on over the years. When I came into the field, there was a lot of very, very historical services going on from probably the 60s and 70s that have just been rebranded and reutilized within the population. And we deal with very, very specialized groups of individuals. Every brain injury is different, so to try and do cookie cutter services, vocational services, is detrimental. So what we've tried to do is develop very streamlined vocational programming. Creative vocational programming has been very successful utilizing the arts, whether that be traditional production art, fine art. We've even, in my career, developed out a custom bike shop and elements like that, where individuals are doing industrial arts and learning those skills. And it's multi-layered, it's therapeutic, but then it also gives a sense of purpose back, a reason to get up in the morning, a reason to move forward, and the achievements that happen when a piece of art is created, or that custom motorcycle is finished. It's typically a huge achievement for the individual that they can be proud of, because they lose so much because of the injury.
So bike shop, I had no idea that
Yeah.
you were into that. That sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah.
In terms of the innovation, like how did you go from helping people with TBIs and then you went to art gallery and now how do you do that? How do you come up, what are your techniques for the continuous evolution?
I think being open to talent. When you run an ad for a creative, you kind of open yourself up to get everyone on that scale of creativity to come through the door. So it's being open to opportunities, and when those individuals come through the door and you're interviewing them, don't have a preset, this is the employee that I need. The bike shop came up by chance. I'd always had a vision, because we had a lot of guys that had injuries that were, they'd gone through vocational school in the 80s and 90s. Yep. So asking some of those grizzled older guys to sit down and do production art, fine art was never going to be the thing. So we hired a staff member who had a background in motorcycles, and we built a program around that. We purchased it was a bike shop that was actually closing and was selling off all of their stock, so we got all that stuff in there.
So I'm just going to stop you for just a second. When you say bike, I hear you saying motorcycles. Yeah. Are we just motorcycles, or are we bicycles and motorcycles?
It was predominantly motorcycles. We called it the
Okay.
bespoke program, because everything was custom.
Nice.
And yeah, it was a good program. And we had individuals. One of the individuals we provided support services to had been a special machinist in the Navy, So it was his opportunity to do work on a lathe again and produce some amazing pieces that went on the custom bikes that were produced in that program at the time.
Okay, so do you have to wear leather and bike boots when you go to work that day?
It wasn't my cup of tea, but I had other individuals that were in. So our program coordinator would often show up on a Harley Davidson in leather, and he was a big gruff motorcycle guy. But that worked for that bike shop, and that worked for those clients. It worked very well.
My traumatic brain injury was from being the passenger in a Pinto. Okay. So when you say motorcycle, I can only imagine there's an endless list, because my roommate in the hospital was actually playing chicken with a dune buggy and he lost. So that's probably an extreme example, but just people riding down the street and hitting a patch of sand has got to be...
Pretty much most people watching this show are going to know somebody that's had a brain injury, whether that be a stroke, something as traditional as that, but there's car accidents, there's football injuries, there's unfortunately victims of domestic violence. There's all these different pieces where strikes to the head will cause a brain injury. It can be mild or it can be traumatic, and it can be anywhere in between.
Yeah, I can definitely see how making that transition from just providing the art services to getting into motorcycles almost gives you a whole different facade, a whole different level of, let's just go there and just say, you're a lot cooler now. Like art was cool, but motorcycles?
I mean, and now with the supported living group, I mean, in Avon we have the wood shop. So we have custom pieces of woodwork coming out all the time. And again, that was a staff member that found me. I was looking at buildings to rent, to develop out the program space, and there was this amazing woodwork that was just, it was very sculptural in style. And I asked the super who was showing me around, whose work is this? Oh, it's mine. Looking for a job? Tell me about yourself. And he explained he was a technical teacher in the Newington school system for a number of years. He'd been awarded by Microsoft for his innovation utilizing computer technology. We brought him in and he's done amazing things. Keith Merwin is his name, and he's been very, very creative.
So using the computers to manipulate wood?
At this stage, no. What he's doing is he's teaching the clients how to utilize found pieces of wood, even a 2x4 that you could get from Home Depot, and he has techniques to strip it down to its raw natural state and turn it into something structural. It's very architectural in what he does, and you never know. I've been blown away by the pieces that he's taught the clients how to produce. You can take a found piece of wood and turn it into an amazing bowl with a turning technique and finishing techniques, refinishing furniture as well, different elements like that. Again, giving purpose back, hand-eye coordination, all these different things that go into it, and just creativity is so important.
Absolutely. So I'm looking at your background here. Words stand out. It says consumer-centered programs.
Yeah.
So I'm listening to you and going, okay, yeah, I get it. Where are you headed next? Because if this here says you excel at creating consumer-centered programs, and I'm listening to wood shops and art and motorcycles, I see no end.
With the supported living group, we are very, very open. You know, it's not the biggest or strongest that survive, it's those that are fastest to adapt. And we have constantly changing demographics of individuals that we provide support services to. On the acquired brain injury waiver, that has transitioned. We've seen a lot more individuals, unfortunately, that have come to us after substance abuse, overdoses, the opioid epidemic. So potentially looking into developing out sober living opportunities for individuals with brain injuries, specialised under the acquired brain injury waiver program, and private pay models to support that group a lot more effectively. Over the last 12 months, we actually, at Avon, the owner of the supported living group, Christopher Brishan, invested heavily in building out clinical space. So we now have a neuropsychologist on staff, occupational therapists, and 2 board certified behavioural analysts within the agency, so we can better respond to the clinical and mental health needs of the client populations. Growth, moving into the autism waiver, there's a huge population there that are underserved, that we're going to be looking to take some of our service principles and and bring those into the field to hopefully raise the bar in that field and have the other agency providers look on and try and keep up. That's where I can see us going in the next 2 to 3 years, as well as moving into Massachusetts and New York's waiver programs as well.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So I just want to regress quickly and just go ABI, TBI, acquired versus traumatic. What's the difference?
So acquired, the terms are interchangeable most of the time, but acquired brain injury is typically a stroke, something of that nature, whereas a traumatic brain injury is an event where the head is struck, there's trauma to the brain in some capacity. Okay. So that's predominantly the difference.
Okay. So you're a pretty smart guy.
Try to be.
Tell me about your background. How did you get so smart? What's your education?
I went to school, I started my university career actually at Westcon in Danbury, okay. And then went back to England and secured a undergraduate degree in psychology at the University of East London. And then I went on to get a master's degree in clinical community psychology. After falling into the field, the brain injury field in 2010, I went on to be certified as a brain injury specialist, and then worked to get a couple of additional certifications in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a trauma-based therapeutic method, and also hypnosis.
Okay. So the certified brain injury specialist, that was my next question. So you started on it, but tell us a little bit more about that.
So that is part of the Brain Injury Association of America. It's a certification course. Essentially, you have to have spent 500 hours working with individuals with brain injuries, and then it's a complete course that you have to take. There's a test at the end of it where you learn and have to know, the structural elements of the brain, the nature of brain injury, how brain injury can impact the individual and the family unit, rehabilitation, as well as ultimately how to best assist individuals with brain injuries in the community. So that was very, very beneficial to me, helping to undergird some of the book knowledge that I had developed through university.
Okay, and then the eye movement desensitization
and reprocessing.
What is that?
So
I can't even pronounce it.
It's a form of therapy. It's commonly known as EMDR. It was a form of therapy developed by Kathleen Shapiro, and it worked predominantly on trauma and traumatic events. Unlike traditional therapies, which are very talk-based and they can take years to get through that trauma, it works to alleviate the trauma far quicker through something called bilateral stimulation, which is eye movement, just simply left to right. And there's techniques that are involved in it that allow the brain to process through the trauma far quicker. Essentially, it suggests that trauma gets stuck in our limbic system. So if we're a child and a traumatic event happens, that trauma gets stuck there and doesn't allow you to process through it. So as we get older, we continue to process through similar events as that child. And that's where the limitations happen. That's why we have problems as adults in our adult lives. So the desensitization piece allows us to work through that trauma. The individual essentially is pulling up images, memories, and even sensations from the past, and we're helping them reprocess those memories, images, and elements from the past in real time, and helping them understand it and work through it as an adult. It's hugely beneficial. It has a huge amount of benefit with PTSD, and has been used a lot with the troops and individuals that have been in, major traumatic events. I know, being from Connecticut after Sandy Hook, a lot of family members were treated with EMDR because it could be used very quickly and efficiently.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I think I might have to follow up with you on that
yeah.
for myself. Community psychology, how's that come into play? Is that like a team building?
A lot of it is that it's linking all the pieces together and having a thorough understanding of all the elements that have to come into play to support the individuals that we work with. We're just myself, the supported living group, are just one piece of the puzzle. Department of Social Services are another piece of the puzzle. Connecticut Community Care is a care management agency. They're another piece. Then you have the actual individual themselves, their family members. So it's trying to get everybody to work on the same page effectively to help that individual move towards their goals. That's essentially the main element of it. The community psychology piece was beneficial because it provided such a framework of knowledge and understanding to the healthcare field overall. And then I was just able to implement it in the field that I fell into, which was brain injury.
Okay. So you've got a lot of movement in your business. You're moving forward. You're running into challenges probably on a daily basis. Are there any leadership techniques that you find yourself utilizing and relying on a almost daily basis?
One thing I preach to all of the managers that work underneath me is developing a scale of 0 to 10. 10 is, the way I explain it is 10 is the plane has hit the building and everybody's running around and it's just chaos. 0 is it's the best day of your life, everything is smooth, you can smell the flowers. Most things that you're going to come up against are a 4, 3 or 4. And it's understanding that, because if you're in that moment of crisis, you can't think clearly. And it's about learning how to step backwards and look outwards rather than stepping in and looking down, because you can't make critical decisions if you're in a panic state and feeling super stressed out. You need to take time to take that step back and take a look at the big picture, because most things are not crises. Most things can be handled as long as you've got the experience and the skills and the knowledge to handle crises. But it's about taking the time, doing some of that breathing, working in brain injury, using that frontal lobe is so very, very important. And a lot of the times we don't do that. A problem arises, we become overwhelmed, we don't breathe, we're not thinking anymore, we go into that fight, flight or freeze mode, and that impacts everything that we do. So that would be my biggest suggestion is, develop that scale, and when problems arise, really consider where it really is on that scale before you act, because it will give you time to think and take a step back and look outwards.
I think that would apply to
Pretty
just
much
about
yeah.
everybody.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with the traumatic brain injury.
No.
Any thoughts of expanding beyond brain injury to just applied psychology, so to speak?
In the long run, potentially, for the agency, we have the clinical arm of the company at this point, and that's growing. It's growing far faster than I thought because there's such a big need in Connecticut. Developing out beyond that, the world is kind of our oyster at this moment in time because we adapt to where the needs are. So as those change, DSS at this moment in time are talking about working with the prison population, individuals that are coming out of prison, because recidivism is such a problem in Connecticut. It's a problem nationwide. You wouldn't be surprised to find out the vast majority of individuals currently within the prison system actually have undiagnosed brain injuries. So if we're developing appropriate,
not a surprise.
Yeah, if we work with those individuals to develop appropriate assessments before parole hearings occur, and then working with them to develop appropriate plans and support strategies, we may be able to work to reduce down that recidivism. That's just one element. There are options. There are so many options available within the healthcare field.
I can totally sympathize because I know what I went through,
Yeah.
and the pain and the anger of being, one of the smarter kids in class, to then having the brain injury and you know what, I'm getting D's, I'm getting F's,
Yeah.
and I don't care.
Yeah.
Was the attitude. Gotten lots of fights, got suspended many times, and literally graduated high school because I punched the superintendent in the face.
It could happen.
It didn't want me around anymore.
Yeah.
So I hear you when you say the prison population, could they use this? Absolutely, because there's so much pain and anger that comes in, and disappointment, and I thought my life was going to be this, and now it's this, and I had a path, and I don't know how to
I mean, even
I don't know how to follow that path anymore.
even in the standardized population of the individuals that we serve, each one of those individuals develop their injuries as adults. So they had, you grow up in America, you're given this ideology of you go to school, you graduate, you go to work, you get, you make money, you buy a home, you get married, you have kids. So that gets taken away because the things that each individual would work towards, the individual they had become, their identity gets taken away from them the moment that injury occurs. So all those things you spoke about in regards to the anger, the sadness, the depression, is with them. And that's why it's so important to develop these types of programs to give a sense of hope and purpose back, because that helps the individual work through some of the trauma. And the creative arts programming is also important because it's therapeutic. It allows them to work through the trauma in a non-verbal capacity, because sometimes with the population, traditional forms of therapy, pulling from subconscious into conscious, is far, far more difficult than it would be with an individual without a brain injury. So they live in this, it's almost like a prison of their own making. So helping them get out of that through being able to express themselves is hugely rewarding for that individual.
And I find the art very calming. I'm an artist. I own a bunch of art galleries. That's kind of how we met in the first place. But I can definitely say sitting there at night and creating art, and yes, it might be a crutch, but there's probably a bottle of wine over here, and I pour a little, nothing crazy.
Yeah.
I do a little painting, and then I just sit back and I actually watch. I'm an abstract artist, so I just watch the paint drip.
Yeah.
And then I'll get up and I'll flip it. But it's very calming and relaxing, and makes me feel good because I'm creating something. I'm not watching TV or sitting in front of the computer as I typically do. So moving forward, you have a commitment to empowerment, and I assume that is why you've been successful in the past. How do you do that with your help? How do you empower them?
I think overall it's we go back to that, giving a sense of purpose, developing programs that enable that individual to be as independent as possible in the community and as successful as possible in the community. Sadly, if it wasn't for agencies like the Supported Living Group, we would be back in institutionalized settings, in Connecticut, Fairfield Hills, these locations where individuals were essentially cast off and left. Unfortunately, there's still situations where you walk into a nursing home and there's a 50-year-old gentleman sitting there surrounded by a bunch of senior citizens, and it's part of our jobs to work to enable that individual to come back into the community successfully. Helping individuals to rebuild lives is so very important. So that's where I think the purpose is and what we do.
Okay, so that's basically the nutshell of what I wanted to talk about.
Yep.
But I want to know more about you and more about leadership techniques that you've used. So I've kind of paraphrased you in a couple of corners. Tell me what else is going on in that mind of yours.
I think overall I've learned Jocko Wilkins he's kind of an inspirational speaker. He's a former Marine. Some of his philosophies in terms of leadership, I've taken on board over the years, because the military spend a lot of money on leadership, so they typically know what they're talking about, and the idea. They also
spend a lot of money on traumatic brain injuries.
Yeah, and traumatic, not enough, but they're getting. Hopefully, they'll get there at some stage. But extreme ownership is something that I take. So, in reference to that, if a entry-level staff member makes a mistake on shift, I've got to take ownership of that somewhere, because something that I haven't done has enabled that individual to make that mistake.
Correct.
And what are we going to do to ensure that mistake doesn't happen again? Do we have to tighten up our training? Do we have to look at that individual as a hire and do we need to tighten up the way that we're hiring individuals? So that's something that's very near and dear to me. Also developing our, the workflow and identifying what's important. Going into the office, having a list of at least 5 things that I want to achieve for the day, most important things. I'll take the time for the first 5-10 minutes to write those out. It may change over the course of the day, but you've got clear guidelines then what you should be attempting to achieve before the end of the day, because otherwise things get lost and nothing gets achieved.
Okay, so we got about 5 minutes left. I'm going to turn the table and ask you to come up with something. Ask you to dig down deep and go, what can you offer? Let's go with this. Families that have traumatic brain injury, patients in the family. So what would you tell my mother 40 years ago about her ridiculously angry son?
I think the most important thing to think about, and my biggest piece of advice for everybody, is seek out help. Seek out help as quickly as possible, because this isn't going to get better. It's going to get worse, unfortunately. If you have a brain injury, the normal neurological declines that you see in populations as we age, the Alzheimer's, the dementia, those types of things have the potential to occur a lot quicker due to amyloid plaque buildup occurring a lot quicker. So reaching out to an agency such as...
So you said plaque?
Yeah, what goes on in terms of Alzheimer's is within your brain you have neurons, and there is plaque, same as what you build up on the back of your teeth when you go to the dentist to scrape off. Over the years, plaque builds up on those neurons and prevents them from working appropriately. With brain injury, that plaque builds up a lot quicker. So going back to what I was talking about before, it's reaching out to experts as quickly as possible, such as the supported living group, to sit down and have a conversation to identify what do we need to do. Unfortunately, in Connecticut, the wait list to get onto the acquired brain injury waiver program at the moment is 6 years. So to get onto that program is going to be a 6-year wait. And those slots only open up through attrition. Somebody has to pass away or go into a nursing home in order for a slot to open up. But once you're on it, then you have support services potentially for the rest of your life. So connecting with the right people, connecting with the Brain Injury Association of Connecticut for community-based supports. And, as an agency and even as the executive director, we will always make time to sit down and talk to families and advise. That's our duty. It's not always great news, having to tell a family, well, it's a 6-year wait list to jump onto this waiver program can be heartbreaking at times. There are support groups in the community that are free to attend. We have them internally to the agency, but most individuals need some level of support to enable the family to be able to go out and continue working. And there are cases. One of the last cases that came into the agency was actually a workers' compensation case, and the individual was at work working from home. He was a banker. His wife came home, and he was at the bottom of the stairs. Went to hospital. They had him. They went to a hospital initially. They discharged him back to the family, and they realised very, very quickly this wasn't the individual that had gone to work that morning in the home office. Behaviourally very challenging, was very combative in terms of listening to the family members, and the personality had changed completely. So that family reached out to us, and we've worked with them. He's now with us 24/7, but still goes home to visit family, and we work with him to keep him healthy and safe.
Okay, got probably just under a minute left. Could you tell us how to get hold of you?
Just jump on the website, thesupportedlivinggroup.org, and reach out to us via telephone or email. My name is Jamie Arber. I'm happy to help anybody that needs it.
We can find you on Facebook, LinkedIn.
Facebook, we're on Facebook, the Supported Living Group. LinkedIn, just look me up as Jamie Arber. I'm there as well.
Okay, Jamie, thank you so much for coming down. Steve Shappert, Optimum Leadership Television. Have a great night.